Hello everyone and welcome back to the FIDE Grand Prix being played in Hamburg. This is a game from the quarterfinals. It's Peter Svidler versus Daniil Dubov. Really an exciting game. I'm sure you're gonna enjoy it. It has a lot of everything. I didn't end up going to Hamburg. I just stayed in Bad Pyrmont for the whole 3 days. Enjoying some time with family. So sorry about not going to Hamburg and not being able to meet some of you guys. But there's always next time. So that being said, let's check out this very nice game. It's a game from the two of the classical games have been drawn, then two of the rapid games have been drawn, and this is the first game of the faster rapid game. This is the 10 minutes plus 10 seconds increment. So let's check it out. Svidler with the white pieces opens with knight to f3. We have d5, g3, and g6. So the King's Indian attack of the Reti opening is on the board. We have bishop to g2 and bishop to g7. We have d4. And knight to f6. Dubov is ready to castle, and also Svidler. So Svidler castles, Dubov castles. And here we have bishop to e3. The most common move here is just c4, which seems normal. But Svidler goes for bishop to e3, probably as a surprise idea. Now, if you're wondering why bishop to e3, it's a good question. I'm wondering myself. Probably to prevent c5. If black wants to play c5 at some point, c5, knight c6, it's a normal way to develop. For example, if white plays something like bishop to f4, then you can just play c5 and you get a very, very natural development. You don't block your pawn with the knight on c6, for example. So here, bishop to e3, probably as a way of confusing Dubov and maybe gaining some time in the opening. But Dubov, probably c6 here is the way to go, as you can go c5, so c6 is probably what black would play here if this was a classical game, if you wanted to play the best move. But the Dubov is very rarely interested in playing the best move. He always plays, pretty wild ideas. So we have h3, and now comes rook to e8 by Dubov, preparing e5. Since there is no reason for this bishop to stay here, there is no c5 in the position, Svidler moves the bishop back to f4. And this is not a new position. I mean, bishop to f4 is a new move, but this is not a new position. Bishop to c1, people have played this, freeing up some space for the e3 move. c3 is a known move, knight to c3 is a known move, but the move Svidler plays is a new move in the position. So bishop to f4, and we have a completely new game as of move 8. So we have knight to h5. Dubov says, okay, move that bishop from f4. That is a nice diagonal for the bishop. Also opens up his own diagonal. So bishop to g5 and now h6, pushing the bishop all the way back. We have bishop back to c1 by Svidler, and now knight back to f6, and now e5 is definitely coming. So here Svidler could go bishop back to f4, then Dubov would kick the bishop away, bishop back to e3, and then black could already stir some trouble with a move like g4. So Svidler not interested in this. He says it's time to develop more pieces. So knight to d2, and now e5. And okay, Svidler captures with d captures on e5, and now not recapturing immediately, but first knight to e4, saying, do you want to trade everything? And trading everything doesn't really work all that well for white. For example, if knight captures, pawn captures, and queen captures, you get rook captures, and then as your knight here is under attack, you have to move it. But now this pawn is under attack, you can just capture it, but even better, you can go knight d4. Now this pawn is under attack, this pawn is under attack, this pawn is under attack, and black would just pretty much solve all of black's opening problems. So here, instead of trading, Svidler first goes c4. Which makes sense. You always want to attack the central pawn with a less central pawn. And now comes knight captures on d2. We have queen captures on d2, and now d captures on c4. Again, Dubov offers a trade of queens, he's playing black. He doesn't want anything too crazy. Next game he gets white, and then maybe he can look for some chances there. Svidler, of course, declines this. He wants to keep some chances alive. And here, not winning the pawn right away with knight captures on e5, but rather bishop to e6 first. Defending the c4 pawn, there's always time to capture on e5. So we have bishop to e3. Svidler now continues development, again uses this e3 square to develop the bishop. For this game, developing the e2 pawn doesn't seem all that necessary. We have queen to e7 by Dubov, preparing to bring the other rook into the game, and now rook f to d1. This is always an eternal question in a lot of chess positions. Which rook goes to the open file? Do you want to bring the a rook or the f rook over here? If you bring the f rook, maybe you want to push the a4 or a5. Maybe the rook will be useful on the a file. Or if you put the a file here, maybe you're interested in maybe moving the knight, pushing f4 at some point. So here Svidler decides that the f rook belongs on the d file. And okay, we have rook 8 to d8, countering white's rook on the d file, and now rook 8 to c1. And here b5. Dubov is just preparing b4, and Svidler wants to prevent this. If you don't prevent it, if you play something like h4, you get b4, the queen is under attack, queen moves, now knight captures on e5, and black is just, black is just very, very comfortable here. So instead, Svidler decides to prevent b4. He plays a3, and now comes bishop to d5. And it's a very, seemingly a simple move, but it's a deadly move. It's just, well, if Svidler, let's say, plays something like a4, wants to create two doubled pawns on the queen side, then basically the idea behind bishop d5 is just to trade. Bishop captures, e captures, you don't want to capture with the bishop, so after knight captures on e5, the bishop on f3 is not under attack. But here, bishop captures, attacking the queen, and after the queen moves, knight b4 just looks very strong. And now after this knight comes to d3, it's just a much better position for black. Let's say queen moves, knight d3. Now this pawn is under attack, the rook is under attack. Once you move the rook, the b pawn can fall, the a4 pawn can fall. It's just a much better position for black. So here, after this bishop to d5 move, Svidler tried queen to c2, not allowing the capture to come with an attack on the queen after all the trades. And now Dubov waits with the capture on f3, and also with the recapture of the e5 pawn, and just plays a6. Probably with the idea that if white does push a4, it doesn't really come as a problem to black. You can always just allow capture and trade. So here we have bishop to f4. Svidler again plays with this bishop, now putting it on this diagonal, maybe adding another defender, but not all that important, as the e5 pawn is attacked 4 times. Maybe clearing the path for the e pawn, but now Dubov doesn't allow it. With bishop captures on f3, bishop captures, and knight to d4 now, with an attack on the queen and the bishop on f3, queen to e4, and now bishop captures on e5. So what do you do here? We have bishop captures, queen captures, and now knight captures on f3 with check, pawn captures, and rook captures on d1. So Dubov trades everything off the board, rook captures, and now rook captures on e5. And now we have this endgame where Dubov is up a pawn. It's a doubled c pawn, but then again, Svidler has a doubled f pawn. And when you take everything into account, it's a 4-2 advantage on the queen side, and that's what's important here. So if you disregard the pawns on the king side, it's 4-3 in Svidler's favor on the king side, but the kings are on the king side, so it's a much bigger advantage having 4-2 on the queen side, even though it's a double c pawn, because it's very, very hard to deal with threats. From black's perspective. For example, you could play some rook to d7, a very active looking move, but then rook e1 check forces the king into this hideout he created here, the 4 pawns here, and then you can just go rook e2, and next you're gonna pick off this pawn. For example, if rook captures on c7, now you play rook captures on b2. Now you have 3-1 advantage on the queen side, and white doesn't really have all that much he can do against just capturing yet another pawn, and then it's just 3-0 advantage on the queen side. Or if you try something like rook to a7, it's not a problem, is you can just start pushing your pass pawn. So it's a very easy win for black if something like rook to d7 was played. So Svidler decides it's best to just prevent rook to e2. He plays king to f1. Makes sense. You want to bring the king into the game, and Dubov does the same. King g7. We have rook to d8, and now comes a5, preparing b4, and also preparing to create. If b4 c3 is played, then it will create a very strong passed c pawn. We have f4 by Svidler, and now rook to c5, defending the c7 pawn, also preparing to push c3, king to e2, bringing the king into the game, and now c3. There's not all that much you can do if you don't want to allow capture. So pawn captures, and now comes a4, trying to create more weak pawns on the queen side. And here Dubov can play c6 just to defend the pawn here. He can play b4, he can advance the pawn here, or he can just capture, which he does. The engine prefers c6, but this can be bad. You have 3-0 advantage on the queen side, so this is what Dubov goes for. We have rook to d4. Now Svidler wants to get his rook to a4 after the pawn is advanced to a3. He wants to put his rook behind the passed pawn. We have a3 by Dubov, and now rook to a4. We have rook to c2 check, and now you can either try and get your king over to the queen side to guard against those queen side pawns, and then allow the capture of the king side pawns, but you're still not going to be able to capture the a3 pawn because, for example, check just picks up the rook, not the greatest of plans. So after king to e3, defending the f2 pawn still, we have a2. Now the pawn is once again defended. We have rook captures on a5, eliminating one of the pawns, but now comes king to f6. Dubov starts marching his king closer to the queen side. We have g4 by Svidler, king to e6. We have h4 by Svidler, and now comes king to d6. And here Svidler is without many useful moves. You can't go after this pawn. You can't go after the rook, otherwise you lose the king side pawns. You can't threaten any pawns here, any checks. This pawn is protected. So there are no moves that can actually create threats. You could play f3 just, for example, not to make f3 a target, but then black just continues with his plan. You want to get all the way here, push the rook back, and then start bringing the king deeper into the position. You want to basically get it over to b1 to threaten a1 queen, and after, well, the rook checks you from somewhere, then you block check with the rook. That's basically the idea. But Svidler decided to go for f5, and here Dubov just played g captures on f5, and it was in this position that Peter Svidler resigned the game. So game one of the fast rapids goes to Daniil Dubov, and the second game where Dubov had the white pieces was drawn. So with this game, Dubov eliminated Peter Svidler from the Hamburg FIDE Grand Prix 2019. And Dubov advances to the semifinals, where he will face Fianchetto Duda, which is already being played, but as we're a bit behind since we were covering the other tournament and I had to go to Germany, I haven't had the opportunity to show these games, and I really enjoyed this one, so I wanted to show it to you. The reason why Svidler resigned is, well, he had some 3 minutes on the clock here, but there really isn't all that much he can do. After the pawn is recaptured, you cannot capture with the rook. You have to guard the pawn from queening. So the idea is what we already mentioned. You will just bring your king to b6 to f3. You make the f3 pawn no longer a target. King b6, once the rook moves, now you start advancing the king all the way to b1. And there aren't all that many great plans here. For example, this rook will start checking you if you go for the b file, but it's not a problem, since you can always just dodge checks, and then once you reach b1 you will just cover with the rook b2, and then you will promote this pawn. Or you can start marching with the white king, but then just rook f2, and then you're gonna pick up all the king side pawns, and you're gonna give up this pawn, but you're gonna grab all of these guys, and it's there's no counterplay here. If king back to e3, then rook h2, you go after the h4 pawn. If rook to a4 to guard the pawn, then you move the king back, king b5, rook a7, you're going to push c5, now you're going to start pushing the c pawn as well, and white has no counterplay here. So of course Svidler knows this, and after g captures on f5, he resigned the game, and a very nice victory for Daniil Dubov, who, as I already mentioned, advances to the semifinal, where he will face Polish Grandmaster Fianchetto Duda. That's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. A lot of you have requested it in the comments, so there it is. I really enjoyed it as well, so thank you for that. I would like to thank Dario Galinets, John Wamsley, Mario Gudel, Ryan Farouk, and Timofey Volotsky for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. And as you know, you probably realize the quote above the board and why it's there, but the meaning of the quote above the board is actually twofold for this video, so you can also try to guess why is that in the comment section. So yeah, as usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE Grand Prix, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and of course, preparing our next big saga. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.